You must first pace the shadowed streets of Rome, your feet treading uneven stone slicked with the urine and sweat of the city's million souls. June's heat rises in oily exhalations from the Tiber, heavy with the riverbank's rot and the stench of sacrifice. At every corner the city dreams of violence, low curses coiling from the throat of a senator's bodyguard, a wine seller's hand pressing too hard against a slave's bare neck. Somewhere behind those ochre walls, secrets fester. An empire built upon the quicklime bones of conquered kings pulses with a life that is as much diseased as divine. This is the eve before Elagabalus, a boy not yet fully grown, proclaimed son of the Syrian sun, monstrous in decadence but not yet crowned in blood, crosses the threshold of Roman history. You sense it in the air, a mood both feverish and strangely expectant, like the city itself is holding its breath, poised between revelation and ruin. The people murmur with superstitious anxiety about omens, a comet glimpsed at dawn, a dog barking in the Senate house, a calf born with two heads. It is the twilight of old powers, a time when Rome's gods are mocked by their own priests, and wares from every scorched corner of the earth choke the markets. Inside the Palatine, spoiled meat spoils further in gilded kitchens built by Tiberius and repaired endlessly by men who cannot eradicate the vermin. The imperial guards watch their own officers with narrowed eyes, remembering how quickly emperors rise and vanish. At the city's edges, seditious rumors flicker from tongue to tongue, images of the legions in the east, of painted standards raised beneath a midnight sun. The discontented elite, these Scipios and Claudians, toothless behind their jewels, plot with greasy fingers, hands kept clean only by the blood they have others spill. In this Rome, nothing is sacred except excess. The amphitheaters reek of gore and fear, the games more sadistic each year. Emperor Caracalla's ghost still drifts through the baths he built, his memory as much a political poison as a familial one. Where once the city worshipped order, now chaos is the true sovereign, attended by priests with hollow eyes. The old laws have become a charade, as arbitrary in enforcement as the sudden storms that batter the marble rooftops. The empire's borders, once a source of pride, are now fraying tapestries, gnawed by Parthian arrows and African rebellion. Beneath the surface, Rome's heart is slack with exhaustion. The city has become addicted to novelty, spectacle, and scandal. The more obscene, the better. It is no accident that its next ruler will be a boy emperor who embodies otherness and extravagance with a conviction only the young or the damned can muster. Rome is ready, not for renewal, but for something more perverse, more exciting, a living affront to everything it claims to stand for. The city's nervous aristocracy senses this, shivering in their mosaic-tiled tricliniums, as if a storm were gathering behind the sunblinds, ready to deliver them from boredom into carnage. You move now through the Subura slum, close enough to the city's pulsing center to feel the first shivers of alarm become awe. Prostitutes, beggars, and false prophets gather at public fountains, whispering stories about the East. A boy in women's silks, a priest of an alien sun who dines with snakes and wears rubies like wounds. You hear their words, each retelling a new layer of exaggeration and hope. For the rich, this is a time of dread. The old claim to virtue is already ashes in their mouths. For the poor, the legend of Elagabalus is possibility, a fever dream that lifts them for a moment from hunger and humiliation. Listen, in the alleys, a child's laughter skitters like a beetle, and just as easily, a shriek. The empire itself is a child now, brutalized, disoriented, and dangerous. Political orders, you realize, are always fragile. Decadence is not decadence until someone feels threatened by the hypocrisy it reveals. Elagabalus, child of Syria but soon emperor of the world's greatest city, is a cipher for these anxieties. He is already in imagination a monster, a god, a mask, half prophecy, half curse. The city's dread is shaped as much by what it hopes to see in him as by the stories of his own violence that are waiting to be made true. Across the night, the Palatine's marble glows fatally pale, a blank stage for a performance no one can yet script. Senators drink themselves to oblivion, haunted by old auguries. Women prick their palms with needles, drawing blood as a ward against the uncanny. In the temples, the gods themselves seem weary, their idols layered in dust and broken teeth, as if divinity can no longer sustain the weight of empire. If you listen to the silence that gathers just before sunrise, you can hear a truth as chilling as any prophecy. This is a city that has always required monsters, not just to fear, but to feed its notion of identity. In every echoing atrium, in every stink-filled tavern, Rome waits for the blood that will remind it is still alive. By the morning, Elagabalus, cocooned in the east, still shaping his appetites, will be summoned forth. His name, for now, is only a rumor, a question. Yet how quickly that will change. He is what the city's hunger has conjured, and what its nightmares have always deserved. In the gloom before daybreak, you glimpse it. The shadow of the boy emperor stretching across the forum, impossibly long, like some malignant dawn. Rome, in aching anticipation, prepares to see what kind of monster it has made real. Imagine the glint of Syrian sun on boyish skin, flesh almost iridescent with the sweat of ritual and expectation. You peer behind the veil. Before the fevered mask of Elagabalus crowns him in horror, the child is simply Varius Avitus Bassianus, born of ancient priestly lineage, a creature half god before Rome ever touches him. In the blackened cella of the temple at Emesa, incense curls in silver ropes around obsidian altars. The air pulsed thick with the copper tang of sacrificed bullocks. Each dawn the boy is pressed into rites older than empire. A whispering chorus, voices low with anticipation, seeps through every perfumed stone of his ancestral home. This is the seedbed of his monstrosity, if monstrosity he bears. An altar boy made holy by proximity not to power, but to devotion twisted by inheritance. His mother, Julia Soamius, ambitious, inexhaustible, stokes that sanctity like a fire. There are no gentle hands here, only those that anoint, that clutch, that shape prayers into commands. Each gesture, each prayer, each brushstroke of sacred oil imprints on the boy a pattern, compliance fused to ecstasy, performance bound to survival. His father is an abstraction, a shadow rendered impotent by the overwhelming ambitions of the maternal line and the furnace of the Syrian sun. What is it to inherit the priesthood at 5, to be swaddled and paraded, to feel the eyes of city and deity upon you? Elagabalus, before his new name, is trained to be seen and worshipped long before he may desire to be understood. The high priest's robes itch with dust. The gold circlets press against his soft brow. Already costume is prophecy, disguise a second skin. The stone emblem of Elagabal, black and pitted, rests on his shoulder with the cold indifference of destiny. By adolescence, imagination and reality are no longer estranged. He is the center, the intermediary, in the theater of both the gods and their worshippers. When he gestures, men prostrate in abject awe, confusing his childish laughter for the voice of heaven or the threat of apocalypse. Psychologically, a boy so pressed and adorned is both invincible and infinitely brittle. The twin poisons of attention and solitude shape his character, mirrors everywhere, yet never seeing his own true face. Every affection is loaded, strategic, calculating, hungry. Every punishment amplified by prophecy. He must be preserved, or Rome will die. Nor is he permitted friends, only flatterers, lovers sanctioned by matriarchs, and priests who never truly relinquish control. In the forge of this temple, obedience and boundary recklessness become indistinguishable. The world as adoration, the self as altar, violence as proof. When Caracalla, the mad emperor, is murdered and Rome itself becomes a feast for wolves, the eyes of the Severan women fall to Emesa. It is not simply expedience. It is the old law of opportunity. Power swells in the cracks of empire. The soldiers in Syria are restless, their flesh marked by whiplashes and mosquitoes, their souls hollow with the absence of a strong Augustus. The idea emerges. Why not this boy? Why not priest become prince, fresh, divine, uncorrupted by Roman vice, or so they imagine? For Julia Maesa, aunt to Soamius and linchpin in the Severan constellation, the plot is obvious. Wrap the boy in prophecy. Enrobe him in the colors of Mars and sun, stoke legionary superstition until they mistake his androgynous beauty for the favor of the gods. The making of Elagabalus is thus an act of political sorcery, a collision of Eastern mystique, familial strategy, and the mercenary instability of the Roman army. To the veterans, exhausted by years of arbitrary slaughter, he represents the possibility of transcendent order. Not another emperor, but an avatar, delirious with otherness. His legend erupts before his body is fully grown. At campfires, the rumors multiply. He can call birds from the sky, survive poison, dance in a woman's shoes by moonlight, bleed and not die. These are the stories men invent when they need both savior and scapegoat. Across the east, banners are painted, coins minted with his untested face framed in glory. The entire machinery of imperial presentation is mobilized to reshape the world's perception. Pamphlets and public prayers, astrologers' scrolls, even the repulsive forced suicide of rivals are woven into a tapestry of inevitability. You see him, in your mind's eye, rehearsing the gestures of Augustus and of Venus and Baal, at once child and chimera. He slips easily into expectation, for expectation is the water in which he has always swum. The city he approaches is one that fears youth and the outsider alike. His identity, a queer delirium of gender, godhood, innocence, and seduction, becomes the lever by which the Severan women mean to overturn the order of the world. And what of the boy himself, the monster in the making? Even before Rome claims him, he has been shaped by forbidden ritual, maternal longing, and the silent, endless incantation of power. He learns early that to transgress is to be seen, and to be seen, rapturously, hungrily, is to rule, if only for a little while. The psychology of the adolescent emperor is therefore a tangle of confusion and clarity, exhibitionism and objection, superstition and survivalism. To wield the sword and the veil, to switch from priest to plaything, to stand at the axis where gods and men intertwine. This is both freedom and curse, solace and trauma. In the soil of such experience, the seeds of cruelty are easily sown, not as original sin, but as bruised inheritance. Here, Rome's future cruelty toward him will mirror the cruelties once inflicted in the name of holiness, display, or kinship. You, the watcher, may imagine the weight. Every glance a potential betrayal, every applause an omen, every petal of praise laced with thorns. Small wonder if, when he at last enters Rome in a riot of dust and gold, his soul has already learned to mask horror with splendor, and to answer love with calculated violence. Here, beneath the withering eye of sun and empire, the monster is made, but not of his own devising. Rome does not merely await its tyrant, it fashions him, garment by garment, as a living reflection of its hungers. Soon, the masks will come off. For now, the boy simply learns to wear all those that are forced upon him. Now the city's pulse accelerates, each new sunrise thickening with speculation, admirers and detractors vying to catch a glimpse of the adolescent emperor whose presence is less imperial than spectral. What emerges down Rome's marbled avenues is not a sovereign carved in marble, but a mercurial silhouette crossing thresholds with a dancer's poise, trailing the incense of 100 unorthodox altars. You see Elagabalus, a child priest, yes, yet stranger even than that, ambiguous in stance, shimmering in layered veils. The empire, so accustomed to the cadence of marching boots and masculine authority, must now reckon with a youth for whom gender is not a prison, but a palette, costume not badge, but rebellion, and divinity as performance. He arrives in Rome like a dream the city cannot fully recall, drawn in distant dyes, his hair oiled and piled high in Syro-Phoenician fashion, eyes ringed dark with kohl, lips too lush for Augustan gravitas. His retinue includes eunuchs, Syrian dancers, priests dressed as priestesses, all a living tableau that unsettles legions and senate alike. You smell the heavy myrrh and nard carried by his entourage, a fugitive sweetness overlaying the stonier, sweat-salted odor of Roman custom. As the parade winds through the city, the crowd's applause curdles into confusion, then nervous giggling, then fractured awe. Rome, whose self-image is built upon the rigid axis of vir and civis, finds itself staring into a funhouse mirror, its emperor neither man nor woman, neither Roman nor barbarian, but a shifting accumulation of opposites resolutely refusing synthesis. With every public appearance, Elagabalus stirs the social cauldron. He abolishes ancient spectacles, recasting them with Syrian ritual, offering animal entrails to a black meteorite hauled through the streets in a gold chariot. He wears pearls and silk, then shifts to the armor of Mars, a living oscillation that shreds the boundaries Rome had thought secure. He takes lovers regardless of sex or rank, commands his own body to be shaved, perfumed, draped in mesh and gold. The Roman elite, steeped in misogyny and terror of the foreign, gasp at the reports. Their emperor seeks to be called lady, to marry husbands as well as wives. Through his subversive acts, Elagabalus reveals the empire's chief myth, that order is possible, that roles are fixed, that the mask cannot eat the face. Every costume, every religious innovation, cuts. For the young emperor, there is no power without transgression, no worship without theatrical blasphemy. What the chroniclers call depravity or madness is, in another light, a screaming refusal of the burrowed shame calcified in the city's senatorial rows, a queering of power, a flamboyant encroachment by the colonized East into the sanctum of a crumbling West. The ancient rites of Jupiter Capitolinus are replaced by hymns to Elagabalus sung in shrieking tongues no Roman can fully parse. The air in the great temples shifts. It is richer but also cloying, suggestive of both arousal and rot. You, observing, see how the old men scowl, clutching their togas with white-knuckled sanctimony. They call meetings, send envoys, whisper of conspiracies and omens. Rome's collective nightmare finds its flesh in this provocative child, who refuses to honor the boundaries that delineate not only gender and religion, but power and its illusions. His wardrobe becomes an arsenal, each silken shift a stab at the empire's sense of what is normal, holy, Roman. He does not simply overturn customs, he exposes them. Striptease as interrogation, pageantry as politics. His favorite priestesses are said to be lovers. His gods, both familiar and obscene, are made into a theater of sexual and spiritual ambiguity. But the rebellion is not mere nihilism. There is method behind the mask. Elagabalus grasps the truth known instinctively by all outsiders. Those who cannot blend must become spectacle, must distort the rules until they are their own sovereign. In the absence of trust, there is only performance. In the absence of inclusion, only excess. The more Rome recoils, the more elaborate the emperor's displays become. Rumors, of course, sprout rank as mushrooms in rain. Some contemporary writers speak of night patrols seeking out pretty men for the emperor's court, of clandestine marriages to charioteers and slaves. Others insist he offers enormous sums to any physician who can manufacture a vagina. The reality is impossible to extricate from the legend, and perhaps that is the point. For the true horror, the real affront, is not who Elagabalus might be behind closed doors, but that he forces Rome to confront what it fears becoming. Protean, unpredictable, indivisible from chaos itself. There is a darkness in this spectacle, one modern ears may recognize in the rituals of both fame and populist backlash. The emperor's persona is at once weapon and shield. The more he parades his difference, the more violence circles, unseen, through the marble halls. Rome has built an identity on the erasure of outsiders. Now that outsider sits in the palace, rewriting the script with each stolen garment, each violated expectation. Power, gender, and faith, all have become masks, until the masks themselves become flesh. In the flickering torchlight of the imperial palace, you see, adolescence sundered from innocence, sexuality pressed until it becomes a public question, religion twisted to mock its own guardians. Even as Elagabalus rules, you sense the city's knives being whetted in the dark. Danger made more urgent with every perfume-drenched procession, every blasphemous prayer. The boundary between pageant and prelude to execution shrinks, shudders, threatens to vanish. The boy emperor dances on the knife edge of Rome's anxieties, gilded but haunted, and each step forward is a dare, a demand that the world decide not what he is but what it can stomach becoming. It begins, as all true horror in Rome must, behind closed doors thick with velvet and smoke, luxurious chambers humming with dread. Here, the emperor's appetite, legendary and elastic, corrupts every surface, every gasp of air. Step quietly now. Your feet are silenced by silk, but your senses recoil at the coppery tang that lingers beneath the perfumes. The young Elagabalus, aged little more than 16, presides over a court that exults in spectacle. Each night a ritual, each feast an invocation, less of celebration than of power's capacity to destroy. The stories bleed outward from the palace, growing more lurid as they slip down the marble steps and into the alleys. Chroniclers, Herodian and Cassius Dio, scribble in outrage and erotic fascination. A boy god who devises new punishments as others compose symphonies, an emperor who makes execution an art form. The rumors are half smothered by imperial censors, yet they multiply in the city's low vaults. No one knows which tales are inventions of the Senate's venom, and which are the quiet truths muttered by exhausted kitchen slaves. Still, there are rituals and amusements indisputably his. Imagine a midnight banquet, the velvet cushions clammy with spilled honey, trays sag beneath pyramids of songbirds, gleaming aspics, tongues of rare sea beasts arranged like floral offerings. Laughter skates across the surface of wine. The guests, courtesans, eunuchs, actors, and those patricians, too jaded to resist an invitation, find themselves drawn into contests designed to abase and terrorize. A seeming jest. The tables are rigged with hidden levers, summoned to collapse so that guests fall in silken heaps to the floor, to be pelted with roses until they nearly suffocate in the perfumed avalanche. But the laughter that follows is jagged, and its edge too sharp for comfort. Nearby, Elagabalus surveys the proceedings. A painter in blood and shadow, slender fingers motioning for a new entertainment when tedium encroaches. Sometimes the spectacle is sexual, the prizes and punishments alike indistinguishable from humiliation. Other times death is the final punctuation. Slaves trussed like animals are offered as prizes for the victor of a rigged game. Rivals are rumored to be sewn into animal skins, torn apart by dogs released into echoing halls. Even the less lethal amusements suggest sadism pressed through the sieve of boredom. Guests find themselves served wax or stones instead of sweetmeats, an anticipation of real poison mingling with laughter, their eyes flicking always to the emperor for a reaction that never comes. Here, murder and merriment are fused. Blood, human and otherwise, is an accessory to the show, pooling on tiles whose luster cannot quite mask their stains. The air is thick with incense, yes, but also the subtle reek of fear, that animal rankness wafting from throats gone dry. Few trust the food, fewer trust one another. The emperor's whims are law and his boredom is ruthless, a moral experiment as much as a political one. What happens when pleasure is measured by transgression alone? When power's ultimate communion is cruelty witnessed, performed even, sometimes enjoyed? He invents new offices, a master of nightly revels, a chief of the imperial fish pond. The latter is responsible, it's whispered, for ensuring that supper guests thrown into the vast pools by surprise may claw their way out or not, watched by a delighted sovereign, and the brittle laughter of his mother, Julia Soaemius. Punishments for displeasure can be as elaborate as position allows, culminating in mutilation disguised as play. Some say this fever dream is the legacy of decadent Greece, others of effete East, but the truth is far more Roman, carved into the granite of their own history. His predecessors gorged the populace with death in the circus. Elagabalus simply drags the spectacle indoors, rubs it against the flesh of the powerful, makes a theater of individual humiliation where once there was anonymous slaughter. The horror is not simply the violence, it is the intimacy. The circle tightens, the line between observer and victim blurs. At any moment, any guest might become the next prop in the emperor's games. The weight of forced laughter, the knowledge that every gaze is a snare, recasts the candlelit luxury as a haunted house, velour and amethyst mere camouflage for terror. You draw in the air, thick as a basting sauce, and feel the ancient walls pulsing with secrets. Outside, Rome mutters about the corruption of youth, sneering at foreign vice. But it is not foreignness that appalls. It is the audacity with which Elagabalus wields the power everyone else claims to abhor, yet secretly envies. He makes visible the violence lying dormant in Rome's own customs, the forced suicides, the summary executions, the unspoken right of a master over his slaves. He brings the blood to the banquet, the gallows to the parlor. There are, too, the rituals of the temple, blood rites devoted to the black stone of Emesa, the sacrifices of oxen and sheep performed with an ecstasy bordering on mania. The emperor's own hands are sometimes stained, and sometimes he demands the company of senators so that no one, even the purest, may claim ignorance or innocence. The moans of dying animals, the gleam of ichor on the marble, the smell, rank, metallic, always fresh, become the pulse of imperial existence. Under flickering torchlight, blood becomes currency and confession. It is a communion holiday, a sadist Eucharist. So you see, the feasts and ritual sacrifices are not random horrors, but structured inversions. A way to unmask hypocrisy, a drag show of violence performed for the morally anxious to gasp in horror and delight. Rome cannot decide whether it wishes to be shocked or entertained or purged. In this ambiguity, Elagabalus churns the court, a golden blade in a bowl of spoiled cream, and all the while you sense that whatever carnage blooms within these velvet walls, worse is waiting just beyond. The city learning to love its own terror. Outside the suffocating candlelit inferno of the palace, Rome itself rattles with collective panic. a city gorged on horror, struggling to hold the boundaries between legend and truth. The aristocracy, always vigilant for threats to its own sanctity, reacts with a species of refined hysteria. For them, Elagabalus becomes not merely a deviant emperor, but the living emblem of Rome's decline, its secret filth made flesh. The upper classes make a monster of him, sharpening every deviation until it gleams with the deadly chill of prophecy. If the emperor is a scandal, his infamy is as much a weapon as a wound. On the Palatine, senators convene in whispering knots, their voices crackling like dried reeds in the wind. They fashion tales from common anxieties, of an east wind corrupting the west, of ancestral gods mocked beneath the shriek of foreign symbols. Elagabalus is not an aberration, they insist, but an existential threat, the sum of Rome's worst nightmares. Every public act becomes theater in this psychodrama of power. Every violation of custom, a signal flare warning that the boundaries upholding civilization are dissolving. Moralists ink polemics with trembling hands, while the city's poets snicker in shadowy porticos, their satires looping the emperor's image into burlesque, even as the true horror festers deeper inside the walls. Gossip, Rome's truest currency, circulates like a fever. Women repeat rumors in the baths, slaves whisper as they scrape vomit from marble floors. Some tales are brazenly invented, every orgy redoubled in depravity, every blasphemy made more grotesque from one retelling to the next. But between the fictions, real fear pools like rainwater in the city's gutters. Elagabalus becomes less a person than a mood, a dreamy, muscled boy in rouge and gold silk, mouth painted as if for a sacrifice, a visage both seductive and obscene. In the collective fantasy, he is at once harlot and high priest, demon and child, evidence stitched together to indict an entire world sliding toward darkness. The foreignness of his rituals is a special goad. The emperor's dedication of the black stone, parading it through the forum amidst eunuchs and Syrian priests, is chronicled with escalating disbelief, as if the very stones of Rome shudder. The more Elagabalus performs difference, the more the Senate and people reassert their own identities, constructing boundaries of taste, gender, and citizenship in desperate defense. Privately, the old men quail at memories of Caligula and Nero, convinced they see an apocalypse written in mascara and spilled sacrificial blood. Publicly, they call for purity, for the restoration of the real Rome, a city that, if it ever existed, could do so only because its monsters remain safely distant or dead. But hysteria is clever. It courts complicity, even as it feigns disgust. The nobility who decry corruption are themselves deeply invested in rumor, drawing on it as a means to vendetta. Elagabalus is used to settle old scores, to direct the mob's attention away from their own embezzlements, adulteries, and treasons. The hunger for scapegoats is older than Rome itself. In the emperor, the ruling class finds the perfect canvas on which to paint its fears and desires. He is Eastern effeminacy and childish wickedness made incarnate, a category of accusation masquerading as biography. You notice how even the populace, hungry for spectacles, does not turn away from the monstrosity thrust before them. Instead, they watch as if hypnotized, savoring the latest outrage as proof that the emperor's downfall is not only desirable, but imminent. Pamphlets and graffiti blossom, the city's white marble scrawled with crude cartoons, the emperor in women's dress, cradling stolen jewels, performing mock sacrifices with a Roman wolf by his side. The subversive delight in these images is not all hatred. There is also a sickness of yearning, an obscene hope that the emperor's abominations will tear down what is rotten so that something new, however monstrous, might rise. So too do the mechanisms of state turn monstrous in defense of their order. Surveillance tightens, informers bristle through the court and city. Senators purchase the silence of former lovers. Priests denounce priestesses. Neighbors denounce neighbors. Everyone performs virtue, terrified of being caught in some web of complicity. The lines between truth and libel, law and spectacle, paranoia and prudence collapse. The city itself becomes a theater haunted by suspicion, each shadow sharp with accusation's possibility. If Elagabalus is a scapegoat, his flesh is torn as much by the words as by swords. The empire's refusal to recognize his humanity, his youth, his need, his confusion, renders him both more monstrous and more innocent. A generation later, the chroniclers will write of these years with both horror and nostalgia, as if missing the thrill of their own vulnerability. The true crisis is not that Elagabalus makes Rome unsafe, but that he reveals how thin the membranes safeguarding civilization are. How violence can be conjured by consensus as easily as by imperial edict. You, wandering through these stories, might catch the contemporary shape of this nightmare. Media and rumor remain potent assassins, xenophobia and moral panic, timeless distractions for fragile systems in crisis. How many times has a polity projected its failings onto a single living icon, then danced in ecstasy as the sacrifice unfolds? If Rome is empire eternal, its cruelty is also eternal. Its need for monsters, its willingness to invent them, and its secret longing for them to devour the world they claim to love. The panic in Rome, therefore, is not only panic for what Elagabalus might do, it is also panic for what Rome, when pressed, so easily becomes. The palace, at twilight, pulses with the hush of conspiracies, arches and corridors breathing out the chill, musty aroma of withered garlands and spilled oil. Step barefoot across mosaics strewn with the petals of yesterday's amusements, your every footfall muffled by the velvet and dust of rooms pressed thick with secrets. This, at the heart of the world's most perilous city, is the real crucible. A court whose every silken fold conceals a blade, where every gesture of affection might be a rehearsal for betrayal. Elagabalus, once adored in the shimmer of foreign ritual, is now encircled by courtiers whose smiles crease into unnatural shapes, whose whispered endearments ring as hollow as funeral bells. Dusk seeps into the corners as if shadow were an ink spilled deliberately, reminding you that here violence is never absent, only delayed. Gossip glances from pillar to pillar faster than any sentry. The air tastes faintly of vinegar and iron, cutting through the perfumes intended to conceal rot. In these labyrinthine apartments you cannot tell where the emperor ends and his assassins begin. It is a court of velvet knives. The machinations are endless and methodical, an invisible bureaucracy of revenge and survival. Elagabalus, adolescent and still starved for genuine touch, oscillates between reckless trust and sudden paranoia. He is surrounded by his mother and grandmother, women of iron will and cold calculation, their love indistinguishable from ambition, every embrace both shield and snare. Beneath their protection, a breeding pit of sycophants and opportunists flourishes. Each is expert in the art of anticipation, every possible emotion already rehearsed should the emperor's gaze demand it. The emperor gifts pearls one night, orchestrates the public beating of a favorite the next. Pleasure and punishment meld. Intimacy and humiliation become strategies in the endless game of access. Psychologically, the emperor's isolation grows monstrous. Each day is a cryptic scroll. Friends and lovers evaporate only to reappear as judges, informers, conspirators. There is no one to trust. Every pair of eyes is both audience and accuser. The adolescent's hunger for connection becomes distorted. Devotion measured in displays of masochism, loyalty and willingness to debase or destroy. He toys with the threat of exile, of banishment, of sudden elevation. His caprices cloak a deeper terror that he himself can never admit, that his power was always conditional, that love itself is just the anticipation of violence. He is never at ease, never permitted innocence. The mood is an electrical storm held in abeyance. At every banquet, every humid garden stroll, danger prickles beneath the laughter. You sense it in the sideways glances exchanged between Julia Maesa and the Praetorian prefects, the coded language of gifts and reprimands. As for the senators summoned to these midnight entertainments, their deference is thick with venom, fawning gestures calculated to acquire a day's reprieve, or perhaps to avoid being the next guest to disappear before breakfast. The corridor between the atrium and the imperial bedroom is lined with marble busts, each face in shadow. The torchlight flickers over features worn blank by centuries, as if even memory itself is on the verge of abandoning this house in fear. The rumors of plots multiply. Was the chef bribed to slip a sliver of glass into a morsel of peacock's tongue? Did a disgraced lover tamper with the emperor's cosmetics? The palace becomes a hive of small betrayals, notes passed in sleeves, sudden silences falling when a favorite enters, cups left noticeably untasted. The frantic pace of execution, favored courtiers slain or sent away, minor functionaries promoted then vanished, creates a new order founded on instability itself. a spectacle of mutual suspicion, as mesmerizing as a dance of marionettes dangling over an open grave. There is a sickly satisfaction in this, an intimacy forged through the shared knowledge of risk, pleasure conjoined with fear. For the Praetorians, so long accustomed to being the kingmakers, a cold calculus dominates every interaction. Loyalty is not to the emperor, but to the shifting logic of survival. As Elagabalus grows ever more erratic, changing favorites, reversing policies, humiliating would-be allies, the guard's patience thins. You notice that soldiers drift ever closer to Julia Maesa, murmuring behind their helmeted faces of the emperor's disgrace, their hands hovering always near daggers. Power, once radiant, grows brittle. The more the emperor flouts custom, the more inevitable his isolation becomes. Even his mother, so ruthlessly pragmatic, begins to entertain the unthinkable. Can this child, for all his divine affectations, be preserved if the court itself is ready to eat him alive? This is not mere decadence, but a kind of moral entropy, a slow suffocation beneath a velvet shroud. To survive here, within these walls, is to become complicit. There are no innocents, only the momentarily lucky. In the shadows behind every pillar you glimpse the true nature of this horror, the ways in which systems force their monsters to perform, until the only way to prove loyalty is to twist the knife, and the only way to love is to anticipate loss. What you witness beneath the gilded arches modeled by mold is the real violence of power, the inexorable collapse of intimacy, the transmutation of trust into surveillance, of affection into mortal risk. In Rome's palatial heart, no one kills for sadism alone. Each act of poison or betrayal is both plea and accusation, the echo of a world in which love and loyalty have been rendered obsolete by the mathematics of imminent death. This is the endgame for all haunted houses, the realization that the walls themselves are imbued with fear, that the living, out of necessity, become ghosts to themselves. The velvet knives grow sharper, the paranoia settles in marrow and flesh. Elagabalus, suspended somewhere between God and scapegoat, awaits not just his murderers, but the precise hour at which survival itself becomes a kind of defeat. Night smothers Rome in a feverish hush. Clouds crawl like bruises across the moon, the forum stones gleaming faintly where rain spatters the blood of last night's sacrifice. In the palace the waxen lights sputter, and somewhere in the deep, a door groans open, the sound barely audible of the world's axis shifting. Elagabalus, once ensorcelled by the promise of endless adoration, is now alone, his perfumed silks stained with sweat, his painted face a mask for terror. Death here is not a sudden climax, but a dreadful unspooling, a slow, sickening foreknowledge that seeps in with every step. It is the Praetorians who come, as ever the arbiters of fate, hands cold, eyes hard, armor glinting in the guttering torchlight. Their movements are methodical, practiced, men who have learned there is no absolution for the violence they must mete out, only routines to numb the spirit. Elagabalus has seen their like before, feigned delight for them at feasts, offered caresses and pearls. But now, as he listens for footsteps in the long black corridor of the imperial apartments, even petulance deserts him. The bloodiest boy emperor in Rome's catalogue of monsters is revealed for what he has always been, a child, trapped in history's unyielding machinery. His death is neither noble nor redemptive. Betrayal bubbles up from the marrow of his own court. Julia Maesa's calculus finds its terrible conclusion, and the Praetorians, sworn guardians, become agents of erasure. The doors are barred. Julia Soaemius, the mother empress, clings to her adored son, both of them pleading, shrieking, forgotten gods spinning in the glare of irreversible loss. There are no bystanders here. Everyone becomes executioner or victim, each gesture viewed through the blinding lens of necessity and self-preservation. Sensory chaos reigns. The shouts echo through the stuccoed chambers, mingling with the stink of lamp oil and terror-churned bowels. The emperor, who once staged his own rituals, is dragged, a tangle of silk and hair extensions, through crossing pools of light and shadow. Poets will later embellish these minutes with mock heroic glamour, but the truth is more raw, more animal. He claws, shrieks for mercy, promises everything and nothing, his words and prayers lost amid the jostling of armor and the clatter of bronze. His screams, high, neither masculine nor feminine, but purely adolescent, pry the silence open. His mother, too, is cut down. A maternal embrace dissolved in arterial spray, the most ancient sacrament in Rome repeated one final, desperate time. No formal trial, no imperial dignity. The body is knifed, mutilated, dragged through the halls by its hair, paraded as spectacle, the flesh of empire displayed like some monstrous cautionary tale. From the atrium to the Cloaca Maxima, his corpse is flung with contempt, blaspheming not just the emperor's godhood, but the very fantasy of purity the city pretends to defend. The sewers gulp up flesh and blood, the river's rotten breath swallowing a legend that can never quite drown. The city, sodden with rain, writhes in its habitual hypocrisy. Monsters are useful only until their danger becomes intolerable, at which point even memory must be unmade. Witness the final horror. Not the killing, but the need for witnesses. Eyes crowd doorways and balconies. Eunuchs sob. Senators linger in relief or terror. Soldiers whisper that this, at last, is order restored. Yet behind every sigh of satisfaction, the dread persists. The murder did not sanitize the rot, only resubsume it. Another mask slips across power's face, another echo of carnage sewn into the city's psychic tapestry. The morality of vengeance is never clean. Elagabalus's destruction bears the debris not merely of eccentricity and violation, but of an adolescent's confusion, a regime's creative rage, a society's inability to face its own excesses except through brutal purgation. What the chroniclers record of him, his cruelty, his blasphemies, his orgies and rites, is half invention, half shadow cast by those who required a scapegoat. The real violence always is the refusal to grant the possibility of innocence or even complexity to the one chosen for the knife. Modern nightmares bear the same shape. The crowd's gasp at the spectacle of disgrace, the swift logic by which outsiders, the inconvenient, the joyful, are reduced to the barest facts and then erased. On Twitter, in tabloids, in the shivering talk of dinner parties, the adolescent monster is murdered again and again, corpses fed to endless appetites. As the Tiber laps at the banks, as the first birds open their throats to incant the dawn, you sense the final lesson written in viscera and river mud. Not all crimes are equal, nor every horror fated. Sometimes it is simply the city's hunger for a scapegoat that dictates who is dragged to the sewer, who is rewritten as monster, and who is left to mourn, unremarked, in the second-hand dawn. Beneath the blood-slicked stone and the rain, Rome will rise for another day, hungry for another myth. The ghost of Elagabalus, boy, god, nothing, everything remains flickering on each granite slab, reminding all who walk these avenues that the city's innocence ends with every sacrifice, and the thirst for monsters never ebbs. Dawn haunts the Palatine with a delicate cruelty. Pink vapor smeared on wet marble, the hush of grief and relief mingled in corridors still sticky with last night's violence. If Elagabalus's body has been unmade, his legend remains, a stain that will not be scrubbed from the empire's memory, a ghost haunting the Senate's conscience and the city's bloodstream. Rome hurls what it cannot assimilate into its depths, decapitating, erasing, renaming, but the echoes always crawl back up the Cloaca Maxima, trailing a scent of cruelty and unresolved desire. Soon comes the damnatio memoriae, the obliteration of memory by decree. Elagabalus's images are gouged from marble, inscriptions scraped away as if time itself might be fooled. The statues, once luminous with gold and pearl, are toppled, their faces battered unrecognizable, the white dust choking the basilicas. Imperial coinage is melted, his name stricken from the rosters of the deified. Yet in every act of erasure the city achieves only an inverse sanctity, a necromantic revival, for what is damned must first be remembered. Whispers eddy beyond the reach of magistrates. Odd tales of the monster, the priest-emperor, the boy who loved too publicly, who ruled outside the brittle rituals of gender, who danced, bled, and loved beneath a foreign god's stone. In the scattered texts that survive, Dio, Herodian, the poison pen of the Historia Augusta, his reputation dilates to absorb all Rome cannot bear about itself. Cruelty, yes. Effeminacy, certainly. Also alien desire, religious apostasy, adolescent anarchy. Elagabalus becomes a prism for every terror the dying Severan age harbored, that power might be unanchored from virtue, that the gods themselves may laugh at custom, that outsider and insider may collapse into a single confounding mask. Memory here is a weapon. Each chronicler's bile is both a confession and a plea. If only Elagabalus can be made into mythic pollution, perhaps Rome might pretend it was ever clean. Yet his after-image endures, always shifting. Through the centuries, poets and artists cannot banish him entirely. His story haunts the shadow side of civilization, whispered in monasteries, painted into the margins of illuminated manuscripts, resurrected in the decadent fever dreams of the 19th century. The symbol of Elagabalus, a boy arrayed like Venus, petulant and vengeful as Caligula, martyred at the unripe age of 18, becomes an axis for every anxiety about order, sex, and the vulnerability of power. The legend is picked over, reanimated, remixed, sometimes a cautionary fable, sometimes a martyr's tale, always a mirror in which each era sees its own monsters, its own fears of contamination and becoming. Does the city ever escape him? You walk now in the Rome of today, sunlight dappling beaten stone, car horns slicking avenues that remember blood. The legacy of Elagabalus clings not merely to ruins, but to the ever-crumbling borders of normalcy, the unease that flickers when the marginalized rise and speak in tongues the majority cannot bear. His memory is invoked when society polices the unnatural, when it scapegoats the other and by doing so reveals its own fragility. In the tabloid's sneer at queerness, in the politician's invocation of decency, in the social appetite for spectacle and disgrace, Elagabalus's specter twitches, unquiet, undefeated. Within academia and queer historiography, his figure becomes a battleground. Was he transgender, a proto-queer martyr, or simply the victim of Orientalist projection? And yet biography here is less vital than possibility. Elagabalus embodies the atavistic unease of empires forever perched between collapse and reinvention. The story is always retold to serve our needs, sometimes as warning, sometimes as delight, always as a valve through which disgust and desire companionably circulate. And so it matters now as ever that monsters are not born but made, fashioned from the sediment of a society's hatreds and longings. Elagabalus was the empire's feral wish, its giddy horror, and finally its most naked confession. In his fate we glimpse the looping logic of every system that devours its children, that flays those it cannot comprehend, that prays its own guilt can be buried with the body it mutilates. If Rome survives, it does so on a diet of ghosts. The memory of the boy emperor lingering on every lintel, muttering in the Tiber's dark undertow. Here at the essay's end, listen. The whispers persist. Each time a society names its monsters, it is Elagabalus who answers, his ghostly body stitched together from rumor and ruin, hunger and jeweled defiance. Memory, like horror, never stays buried, and it is in the haunted after-images of history's scapegoats, neither innocent nor irredeemable, neither wholly victim nor villain, that we find the questions Rome could never answer, and that we inherit in silence long after the blood has dried.